Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to discuss the second round of the Telenet Superprestige, which took place in Ruddervoorde, and with me here to do that is Issam.
Thank you for having me.
We have quite a bit to talk about because that men's race was pretty exciting, and we have a couple of talking points on the women's race as well. Before we dive into the action, I would like to make one point of notice. We are in the double podcast season, double weekends from here onward, which will mean the following. We will discuss the racing in Saturday's podcast, so today we only focus on the Telenet Superprestige and we will give you the results of the other races. In tomorrow's podcast, the Sunday podcast, which is released on Monday, we will be having a bit more of a broader discussion. If there's any news, we will discuss it there unless relevant earlier. The Noah in the Field segment will come on the Monday podcast, and the same goes for the Dutch word on the week. This one is basically recap only. Said enough now, let's recap that race because the men's race was a pretty exciting one as said. Van Toerenhout led a big pack in the first lap. There were few gaps. A couple of riders had a very bad start. We later found out that was due to a puncture. Kuypers was one of them with a bad start, punctured. Felipe Orts had a puncture in the first lap. Cameron Mason had a puncture in the first lap. These riders were chasing. We had a leading group of some 6-7 riders. Then we had 3 riders. Van Toerenhout, Iserbyt, Van de Putte. They got caught. Then the leading group, the composition changed. Kuhn, Van der Haar, Zweek. Then we went to 3 leaders again, 4 leaders, a couple of attacks. Was a lot going on, but at the same time there was not much going on. Despite all the attacks, with 3 laps to go, there were 12 riders within reach of victory. Going into the penultimate lap, Iserbyt placed an attack that led to a situation with 3 leaders, Iserbyt, Van der Haar and Van Toerenhout. These riders stayed together going into the final lap, in which Van der Haar placed an attack. This dropped Van Toerenhout. Just before the steepest and most difficult uphill bank of the course, Iserbyt took the lead. He rode up the bank where Van der Haar had to get off. Iserbyt had a small gap from there and he maintained that gap for the final half a lap. Iserbyt took the victory ahead of Van der Haar and Van Toerenhout. Issam, I would say this is vintage Iserbyt or maybe even just prime Iserbyt. This is how he wins races. For the first 40 minutes in races like this, you don't see him. He's sitting in the wheels, he's chilling, he's keeping an eye on what's going on. He doesn't hit the front. And then at the end he makes a decision, okay, I'm going to go for it now. Okay, we have a couple of leaders, and then he finishes it off in the final lap. This is how Iserbyt does it. We've seen it so many times before, and he keeps doing it today. It's just what he does. He's just so good at it.
Yeah, this is what he does, I guess. It is, for Iserbyt, start of the season wasn't that great, and I think we were in doubt what the coming races would bring. And I guess that today he showed that he still has in it this way of winning, the way of understanding the race, I would say. He understood that there was not really going to be one rider that was going to try and attack and stay up front alone solo. Maybe it had to do with the circumstances as well of the race. There was some wind, so that definitely didn't encourage riders to try and go alone. And I think, Iserbyt read that very well, understood the assignment of staying by the first 3, 4, 5 guys to make sure that, you don't have to close any unnecessary gaps. The right moment last lap, he was there, and the rest was history. Van der Haar, saw it happening and couldn't do anything, and Van Toerenhout was happy to be in third, I guess. So a strong race from Iserbyt, has to be said, and I think that for him it's that victory that he got, and now getting the second victory of the season. I think for him it's now, you can see it before the race in the interviews and now as well after the race. It seems like he is a bit relieved after what happened in Gaveren, and he feels now that he is in a, he looks in a good position, and the way he was racing today was again a little bit old school Iserbyt.
Yeah, you could definitely feel a bit of relief. We discussed it last week. You probably feel the pressure, and you just felt that things, if he couldn't get a win quickly, the media would turn on him. And he doesn't have that now. I wouldn't really say this changes my perspective of Iserbyt compared to Nice. It was a good win by Iserbyt, Nice wasn't here. Okay, but that's fine. Iserbyt should win here. He does win. If he would have lost, my perception wouldn't have changed either, because I think it's pretty close up top. Just that Nice has a couple of skill sets in the final lap which the other riders lack. But I will give it to Iserbyt. The win today was a result of his riding style. Throughout the entire race, you could observe that Iserbyt, and the same goes for Van Toerenhout, were riding more sections, taking risks by trying to ride them, compared to Van der Haar. Van der Haar went for the safe option. The difference was made on this super steep bank, which was basically up and then right away down with a left-hander at the bottom. Super slippery, muddy section before. Iserbyt rides it. He done it a couple of times. Van der Haar was basically running it almost every single lap after he failed to make it up on one of the first attempts. But this wasn't the only section. After this bank, you had another climb towards the left. I saw Iserbyt try to ride that way more than Van der Haar did. Towards the end of the lap, there was this other section where Iserbyt slipped in one of the laps, holding on to the pole. You could definitely see that Van der Haar went for a more risk-averse approach, maybe because he had less confidence, maybe because he also was just lacking on these sections. His skill set might be not as good attributed to that. But that's what made the difference. You could see that Iserbyt was taking the risk throughout the race, and then in the final lap, he did it on the decisive moment.
Yeah, correct. But I also think that for Van der Haar it was also a difficult situation, having two guys of Pauwelsausen behind you. So he was also a bit pressured into doing the work in the last laps, and especially on a course like this, that will that will not be. You will definitely feel that in the legs in the last lap if you had done some work before that. And I think that Van Toerenhout summed it up for himself quite nicely. He was super active. He was trying to stay at the front for several laps and I would say attack and be at the front, be very active. And he felt after the race that he wasn't really rewarded for the work that he has put in the race. And I think that is a bit Ruddervoorde-ish, if you would call it like that, because it is not always the guy that is the most active in the race that wins the race. It's most of the time the guy that is smart, that is always in second, third, fourth position and just strikes at the right moment. And prime example was today done by Iserbyt.
Yeah, he was mainly just keeping an overview, but I don't think that Van der Haar made a mistake by trying to pace a couple of times. I don't think he overdid it. We had a couple of riders pacing. For the most of the time, it was actually Van Toerenhout doing the work. And Van Toerenhout, I definitely felt that he was struggling in the sand for most of the race. He was getting off very, very quickly, whereas others could almost ride to the top. I saw Zweek close a 4-second gap in that sand pit on Van Toerenhout. It didn't look good. I felt like there was momentum to pressure there, but at the same time, Van der Haar tried it once going side by side. Van Toerenhout was just mastering getting into the lead there. He was super strong on the section before. He was strong on a section towards the end of the course. You're just so prone to making mistakes on this course that at some point everybody was on the back foot. Van der Haar was chasing at some point. We had Kuhn up front. We had Van der Putte up front. Van der Putte completely disappeared from the front. Well, he didn't completely disappear, but in the beginning of the race he was at some point away with both Pauwelsausen guys. There was just so much going on, and that is Ruddervoorde, especially with the strong wind there was today. It just makes for bunched racing, and we haven't really seen it in Ruddervoorde in recent years, but definitely if you rewind the tape before Mathieu van der Poel came into cross, this was always a very close race. In the days that Nice raced here, he always had trouble getting rid of Pauwels here. There were multiple other riders here. If you go further back, when Wellens was racing, when Albert was racing, when Vervecke was racing, it always made for close racing. If we look at the entire top 10 then, we can discuss a couple of riders in a bit, because there is still quite a bit to talk about. Iserbyt with a win ahead of Van der Haar and Van Toerenhout. Kuhn ended 4th ahead of Zweek. Kuypers was 6th ahead of Orts. Then 8th place was for Van der Putte, 9th for Van der Bos and 10th for Cameron Mason. Let's start by talking about our punctured riders, Issam, because maybe ride of the day was Gerben Kuypers. Punctured in the first lap, raced all the way to the front, then punctured again, still ends 6th on a course that really doesn't suit him. You could see him struggling in the corners, you could see him struggling on the remount, you could see him struggling to get off the bike, you could see him struggling everywhere. But those legs, they must have had some infinite amount of energy in there, because boy, he was on a bloody flyer today.
Yeah, he had some good legs, but it was just not really the course for him, I guess. And then with the circumstances, the punctures that he endured during the race was definitely not helping his case during the race. And I mean, it definitely wasn't the legs that he was struggling with in this race. I think that he was super good. He was really good, and it was a real shame that, first he lacks technically, which was visible, like you said. Some of the sections was almost painful to watch, and then also having the issues with 2 punctures. But then the way he comes back and the way he goes then through the field again was really good. And for him, it's just a case of finding a race that will suit him well, where he can utilize the good legs and utilize the power that he has, because he is, he has good legs, and he has showed it now a couple of times this season. And I hope that most of the people have seen it also today, that that this performance doesn't go unnoticed with all the adversity that he had to face this race. But if he gets a race where where it's not super technical, and where you can use your power, Pontchateau, yeah, I think that the Europeans, you never know how that race will play out. Now with Nice, Iserbyt already trying to push the favorites role to Nice, which is in a way ridiculous, but okay. And then we have seen it now today as well, that it can be close racing, and if we have a fast track where you can use your power, who knows? Maybe Kuypers can actually do a very good job there. So, but for his performance today, tremendous job. But he needs to work on his technique, and he needs to make sure that he can just go through the sections a little bit better. And then, if he gets such a course and if he works on that, the good results will come in very fast.
Yeah, he is already working on his technique. It's better than last year, and he can and will do well in Pontchateau. I will cook up some hot takes for the preview podcast coming later this week, but I would not at all be surprised if Kuypers wins the European title next week. But back to today, the racing, Kuypers did very well. I think that he forms a very good duo with the Wellens brothers. Bart and Geert Wellens run the team that he's racing for, Circus Reus Technoord. Why do I think it's a good fit? Wellens, Kuypers, they have so many similarities. Both come from working class families. For them, there was no other option. They're either going to become factory workers, farmers, hard-working, labor-intensive jobs, or they're going to become a cyclocross rider. Last season was literally for Kuypers. He got a deadline from his parents. If you don't break through this year, we don't have the money to keep supporting you. You're gonna need to work in the factory. Kuypers was working in the factory part-time, but he would need to switch to full-time. He didn't need to because he broke through. If you look at Wellens, Bart Wellens of course had a tremendous career. Geert Wellens struggled a bit more. If you watch Wellens and Wey, it's the same deal for Geert Wellens. He's either going to need to step up, become a pro cyclocross rider, or he's just going to need to work in a factory or somewhere on the farming land around Vorselaar where they lived, and I think they still live there. I just think that will work well. They can work together. Wellens is somebody who has the know-how. They're both Belgian. Yeah, I just think it will work well, and that it's a good match. I even think that Kuypers could have ended on the podium today if it wasn't for that second puncture, because that was really just the end, game over for him. Before that, he was still remotely close to joining the leaders, and it's still a tremendous job. And we must say the same for Felipe Orts and Cameron Mason, both riders who also punctured in the first lap. They didn't have a second flat. Orts at some point was almost dead last in the race, recovers to 7th, which is, I believe, the 4th year in a row he ends 7th in Ruddervoorde. Cameron Mason recovers, ultimately pays the price a little bit in the final lap, ends 10th, which is still a good result. these are just very good rides. Of course, aided by the fact that there was no cohesion up front, there was no proper pacing, and wind made the pace drop, but you can't underestimate the effort that they did put in against the wind.
Yeah, totally. It was a a hard race, but like you said, one of the circumstances that definitely helped the guys from the back to come to the front was the fact that there was no consistent pace at the front. It was always trying to be at the front in the difficult sections before the sand section, and then going towards the finish line. It was almost like nobody really wanted to be in the front till a couple of corners to then try to sneak a place or two and then be in the front again with where it's going to get a little bit tighter and where you have to do a little bit more turning and go up and down. And so I think that you have to balance it in a way where you place the performances, but if you look at a guy like Orts, the way he crossed the line at the finish, that facial expression says enough. He felt that he had good legs, and when you have such circumstances in the beginning of the race, it's just you don't know what you hit with, and you try to make the best out of it. And that is also part of cyclocross. It's not always going to be all fine. The material will give up one time, you will have a puncture one time, you will have a mechanical, you might actually have a crash, and those are the things that you have to deal with, and that's part of the sport. And it's not always a great race. So I guess for those guys, they showed that they have good legs, and I guess chances will come. And it's interesting to see how in a way tight the field is become from last season, in my opinion, because I think that, of course, we already said it, Ruddervoorde, the results are always a bit closer, but it's still, it was in a way great to watch, and it was also interesting to see some of the names, fighting it out in a top 10 that normally would be further spread apart. So I think that was great to watch.
Then a couple of remarks to close the discussion on the men's race. Tremendous race by Kevin Kuhn, ending fourth, was up there in a break of 3 at some point. Nevertheless, ending fourth just off the podium is great. Of course, has that World Cup podium in Val di Sole, which I predicted it in the previous podcast. Issam, you won't hear the end of that one. But no, on a serious note, Kuhn, very, very strong result, beating Laurens Zweek. Zweek seemed to struggle on the acceleration. For the rest, he seemed fine, was pretty good through the stand. Had this one moment when he looked to be getting into the race, but then ultimately never did, I think. Maybe with the benefit of hindsight, but I did have the feeling during the race that Van Toerenhout, Van der Haar and Iserbyt were marginally stronger than the rest, but good to see the field being a bit closer. We'll take a bit more time to discuss Kuhn tomorrow. Then finally, a rider that maybe underperformed a little was Joris Nieuwenhuis, was at the front but simply made too many technical mistakes today. Let's talk about the women's race then. As the music was pumping very loud, Zoe Backset had the fastest start. Schreiber was eager to take the lead and paced in the first lap, which led to 5 leaders. But once towards the end of the lap Alvarado took over, only Vorst and Van der Heijden were able to follow. In the second lap, Van der Heijden got dropped, which meant we had a fight between Alvarado and Vorst. Fight is maybe a bit of a big word, because in reality Alvarado was dictating the race. She set the pace, distanced Vorst a couple of times, and ultimately just around the halfway point of the race the chain snapped for Vorst. She was unable to follow and Alvarado could cruise towards victory. Vorst ended second, but behind there was a bit of a more interesting battle for third place. That one was between Van Alphen, who ended in that battle because of a broken shoe. She was comfortably in third place before that, but after that she needed to face Van der Heijden and Riberolle. It came maybe somewhat as a surprise that Riberolle was able to distance the rest, but she did. She ended third ahead of Van Alphen and Van der Heijden. So Issam, without Van Empel, it's kind of what we expected. Alvarado was clearly the best of the rest, and now she shows it and takes her first win of the season. Although Vorst didn't look bad physically. My conclusion was that physically they are roughly evenly matched, but that Alvarado on her technique is just a bit better, or significantly better, which led to her taking the win today.
Yeah, I agree. I think that with the field that we had, Alvarado has shown already in the last couple of races that if Van Empel wasn't going to be there, she was the main favorite, and she did exactly what she had to do. The course definitely suited her a little bit better than Vorst, and Vorst struggled a little bit in the technical sections, and also with dismounting of the bike, getting on the bike again, the running. Alvarado, we have already known that, in the running sections, he's way better than Vorst. And I think that showed again today. And you don't have to forget Ruddervoorde is not a course where you throw around with minutes if the level is quite close. And I think that for Vorst definitely wasn't a bad race. Definitely a race where you could build up for the season and get closer to Alvarado, and in races where it would suit her a little bit more, less technical, more power, then I think that Vorst definitely is going to be able to bring up a much harder fight than she has brought up today. But I think that regardless of how the season will play out, I think for today, Alvarado, very strong race and looked very good, and made sure that that favorite role was was completely right, and won the race in the end.
Yeah, I agree. If we are racing on a course like Neil, we end up in a completely different situation. I would guess it might even come down to a sprint, but on a course like this, it's just perfect for Alvarado. She is such a good rider technically, naturally. It's just so good. In the entire career, I've only seen her make one significant mistake, and that tells quite a bit. That mistake was in Heijden when she was fighting for the overall World Cup win against Annemarie Vorst, crashed in the final off camber downhill, which cost her the overall win. It was super unfortunate, but the fact that is the only thing I can remember in what's been a 4 or 5 season career at the top of the game says quite a bit, and it's just nice to see the way that she goes through the field here. It's just a pleasure to watch, and it looks elegant. It's different than Pietersen. Pietersen might be the outright best technical rider, I think she is, but it has a different sense. It's more cutting edge with Pietersen. It looks like she has the risk factor. She is always balancing on the limit, makes a couple of more mistakes. I mean, normally the risk pays off, but it's a different style to Alvarado, who looks elegantly. It looks classy. She hardly makes those mistakes, knows her limits, and just stays within them. Looks very nice, and that gave her the win today. And as said, I think that will continue when the 3 young stars, Van Anrooy, Pietersen, Van Empel, aren't there. She will have opposition from Vorst and maybe from a couple of riders behind, and one of those might as well be Marion Norberg Riberolle. She ended third today, which I think was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, indeed. I think that I would say comes out of nowhere, but it was definitely a surprise. A good ride. It was a very, very solid ride. Was up there in the mix. Then Van Alphen that was there in the front had shoe issues, and Van der Heijden didn't really have the legs to maintain her position. Had some difficulties, and I think Riberolle rode a great race. Was on it and made sure that she didn't let go of that third spot. And I think that is definitely, these are type of races that you really need. You need to take the advantage of the riders that are missing, that normally should be ahead of her. And then you have to make sure that you have the good legs and a good form. And I think she just had that, and it's great to build up from. And I think that that is going to be interesting if this is just a one race in a season, or we are going to see this a little bit more often, because I think that would be very, very strong from her. And also she's in a point of her career that those type of races need to come a little bit more. So it's going to be interesting.
Riberolle has been a rider that has lacked consistency. We know that she is talented, and especially around that time that she became U23 World Champion in Dubendorf, racing for Experza. That period from 2020, 2021, she had a couple of these results, and this kind of resembled that. It looked good, and she will need to move forward from here. It's a rider that has the talent, has the potential. We've seen it from time to time, but it just needs to come out consistently, which so far hasn't happened. But it's not a standalone result. She was pretty good in Ardooien. There she did get beaten by Van Alphen. I think she probably would have if Van Alphen didn't have that broken shoe today. But that's racing. It happens, and you as well as I know, Issam, that the momentum in Belgian media is going to be shifting. On the women's side, all spotlights were on Fleur Morse before the start of the season. She is out with an injury. And that means that now that Riberolle ends on the podium, there's going to be two questions. One, do we have a rider who can compete for podiums in the biggest races? The answer is yes and no. Yes, if you're Belgian and thinking that these races are the biggest races and representative on the women's side, which they aren't. On the women's side, it's really the World Cup, which has all the strongest riders at the line. But two, can Riberolle become Belgian champion? Is this the year the streak of Sanne Kant is ended? The answer to that could well be yes, but we'll only know by the end of the season, because Kant is 10th, Riberolle is 3rd, Frank is 7th. You know how these things go in Belgian media. It's going to make a couple of headlines in the upcoming weeks about the struggles of Kant, but Riberolle of course thinks she would have become Belgian champion last year if she didn't have those 4 mechanicals. Who knows? This year we'll need to wait and see. Let's look at the entire top 10 then. Alvarado with the win ahead of Vorst and Riberolle. 4th place was for Van Alphen ahead of Van der Heijden and Bakstedt. 7th place was for Alicia Franke ahead of Anna Kay and Denise Betsema, who ended 9th. 10th place, as said, was for Sanne Kant. Let's talk briefly about Inger van der Heijden here, Issam. She had a bit of an inconsistent run so far this season. A couple of ups, couple of downs. Was good last weekend in Overijse. Said she came here for a win, or at the very least a podium in Ruddervoorde. To end 5th then was a disappointment. Do you have any explanation for that?
I haven't looked in the legs if there was something there that would give me an answer, but I don't know, to be honest, because I think that today's course, yes, it is technical. It is very, I think, in a way, for a rider that is not the most technical rider, it's a bit difficult to handle and to cope with. And it was also, the amount of times that you have to accelerate, decelerate, and then go again. It's very hard. It's very tough. And if you have a bad day, you can really feel it. And especially if you don't really have the grace of techniques, you cannot compensate on a course like this. So yeah, it is not the greatest of races, but like you said, it's been so far a bit of an inconsistent season. It's not a drama at the moment at the beginning of the season. It's quite normal actually that you don't really find your rhythm in all the races in the beginning, and then the key is then that you find some consistency going into from November and December, that you are prepared for the important races. And I think that that is what she has to search right now, and that will be the solution to better results, to be more consistent and to get the best of yourself in as many races as possible.
I partly agree with you there. I do think it was a bad day, but the time that Inger van der Heijden was a rider who was only good on the faster, less technical courses is well behind us. She's developed into a very versatile rider. She's gotten top 10s in Namur. She's gotten still top 10s on the fast courses, but also top 10s in very technical races like Hulst. Van der Heijden is a versatile rider, which just makes me think today was a bad day, or maybe last week was a super good day, and that this is more of a representation of her level. But the days that Van der Heijden was in the CCC kit, racing for the same team as Marianne Vos, racing in the leaders jersey of the U23 World Cup, maybe even leading the full World Cup at some point there, those are behind us. And I think just that the way she raced, she just hit a wall at the end of the first lap. She tried to keep up, went over her limit, fell back, and that was the opposite of what we saw Zoe Bakstedt do. I'm interested to hear your take on Schreiber, because yes, Bakstedt had the fastest start, but Schreiber looked over eager to take the lead. Schreiber was trying to go around the outside into the second corner, didn't work, then took the lead around the pit zone. Bakstedt was just like, whatever, I don't care, I'll settle into my own pace like she always does in recent years. She's learned from the times that she did blow up, goes at her own pace, comes towards the front at the end, and 6th here, whereas Schreiber it's almost as if she's over fixated on taking that fast start. She goes into the field second, then is super eager to hit the front, leads the race for a lap, or almost a lap, but then as soon as Alvarado takes over, she just completely disappears to never be seen again until she has a mechanical issue in the final corner of the final lap and then ends 11th, which is not fantastic.
Yeah, a weird sight, to be honest. I mean, you see her go very fast in the beginning of the race, the first lap, really, and then you're like, okay, well, it's going quite fast, but hopefully she kind of knows what she's doing and she can maintain that. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and I think it should be very difficult if you maybe feel that you don't really have the best of legs, but you have a very good start to maybe, think twice before you have such a start. And I think that in a way you have to look into it, but also not really, because it's in a way it's the age, the eagerness of willing to race at the front. Knowing that you, on a good day, have the legs to be at the front and be able to maybe race top 5 or within the first 6-7 riders, that will hopefully come, and that will eventually, she will find out how to kind of make sure that you don't blow up that hard as she did today. And yeah, it's at the end of the day, like we said already a couple of times, still beginning of the season. It's still a long road, and don't forget that she also did quite a lot on the road, or at least some races, and new team, and those are all things that you have to take in account. And maybe the preparation wasn't all too great, but the form is kind of there, and it still has to grow. So we'll see where it ends up, and if this will continue over the course of the season, or there will be some improvements left and right.
It's early days, but at the same time, it's almost November. European Championships are around the corner. So I can understand that you want to keep racing for Europeans. Now I'm referring to the fact that Schreiber had a bad road crash last week on Friday. But I don't understand why so much racing then. If you know you're hurt, you know it's affecting you. I'm not saying it's the cause of today's result, but I definitely think it plays a factor here. If you're struggling, if your body is hurting a bit, why race Overijse? Why rush into a midweek race in Woerden, then a double weekend now? I don't think she's doing Koppenberg. Then Europeans, it seems a bit excessive, and I would recommend then, now you're too deep in, it's racing Europeans, and she still has a very good shot at getting a medal. But thinking further, like it's going to be November, at some point you need to build in towards your November form for the Christmas block, try and peak towards Worlds. I think that's the ultimate goal for Schreiber. I don't think she will feature in any of the classifications. She skipped Waterloo. At some point you need to take a rest, and I would recommend her or performance staff to advise her to take a rest after Europeans. It doesn't need to be long, just maybe a week or two. Give the body some time to recover, because your body hardly recovers when you are racing every single weekend, let alone when you take a midweek race into your program. And I would recommend the same for Betsema, 9th today. I'm not going to be harsh on her, because we know she was hit very badly by a car during a training on her island Texel a couple of weeks ago, I think 6 weeks ago, 1.5 months. Feels pretty rushed. It happens so many times. Brandt did it last year. It happens all the time. Riders get rushed into competition. It happened to Kay a couple of seasons ago with a broken collarbone, and then they struggle. I would just recommend give the body some time to heal, and then build again for both of those riders, because else you're just going to be on the back foot. And that's what Lucinda Brandt said after her injury last year. I mean, she said it now. I rushed back into competition. This year I'm not doing it. I'm building slowly, because there's no point in struggling the entire season because I was injured before. Final mention on the race in Ruddervoorde then will be some junior women results. Imogen Wolf, decent result by her, 15th. Kat Ferguson in 17th, also getting a pretty good result. And the same goes for Regina Brusner, a rider from Hungary, second year junior, that is ending 21st today. Then there was more racing in Europe today. There was the Grand Prix Topoljanski, which took place in Slovakia. Václav Jezek took the win ahead of Matej Ulik and Václav Naxera. The women's elite race was won by Victoria Gladonova ahead of Sofia Ungerova and Antonia Bialek. There was racing in the UK. The third round of the National Trophy Series took place in Derby. Thomas Mean took the win ahead of Toby Barnes and Daniel Barnes. Still going strong in the women's elite race is Nikki Brameyer taking the win ahead of Ruby James and Hope Inglis. Then there is the race with probably the longest name on the calendar, the Cyclocross International Souvenir Anthony Revel #NormandieCX C2 race in France, won by a Belgian, Aaron Dox, ahead of Jorben Lauwersen and Clément Horny. Women's elite race was won by Olivia Honesty, Evita Muzic and Joyce van der Beke. That is Olivia Honesty ahead of those names, just to be clear. Then a C1 race in Brugherio, actually televised, available for replay. Very nice course. Timon Ruek took the win ahead of Filippo Fontana and Gioele Bertolini. The women's elite race was won by Sara Casasola ahead of Rebecca Garibaldi and Eva Lechner. There is still racing tonight in Aarhus, but as that is a night race, the results will come in tomorrow's episode. There's also racing tonight for us in Europe at the Really Rad Festival of Cyclocross. We will be recording a separate podcast to cover the final weekend of USCX racing. That podcast will be released on Tuesday. With that said, Issam, thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for listening. We will be back tomorrow when we cover the second round of the World Cup taking place in Maasmechelen. See you guys then. Goodbye.